The old sanctuary had been sealed in 1997, its doors chained after the fire that local records described only as structural damage caused by unexplained heat sources. No one ever clarified what unexplained meant. No one tried. And for 27 years, the place stayed untouched, until Evelyn Hart stepped through its doors that grey November morning. The air inside tasted like cold stone and forgotten prayers. Dust floated in thin shafts of pale light, leaking through the cracked stained glass windows, tinting the room in muted blues and tired golds, the kind of colours that made everything feel suspended between faith and memory. Evelyn wrapped her coat around herself, though the cold was deeper than the weather. It clung to her skin like something trying to keep her from moving forward. She didn't want to be here, but she had no choice, not after reading her mother's final letter. Her heartbeat stuttered when she reached the center aisle. The faint smell of burnt cedar drifted from the altar, an echo of the fire that should have erased any trace of life. And then it happened, subtle, impossible. The large wooden cross hanging above the sanctuary tilted toward her by a few inches, as if acknowledging her presence, as if recognizing her. She froze, breath caught halfway. Crosses don't move. Not after 27 years of silence, but this one had. The story gap opened inside her like a wound. Why now? Why her? And why did her mother's letter lead her back to a place she had spent her life trying to forget? A low tremor of fear rose in her chest, but beneath it, something else. A pull, a whisper of divine timing she didn't understand, as though redemption, prosperity of the soul, and long-buried truths were waiting behind that altar, ready to reveal themselves, if she dared face what had been manifestation all along. Evelyn Hart had returned to the town she once vowed never to see again. According to archived parish reports from 1998, the old sanctuary had been deemed unsafe for visitation due to internal collapses and residual heat damage, a bureaucratic way of avoiding the darker rumors locals whispered, voices heard inside, lights flickering at night, and the scent of smoke drifting from a building long abandoned. Her mother never spoke of those stories. She simply left one instruction, one final breadcrumb before passing away: return to the sanctuary when the time feels right. The morning she arrived, the wind carried the metallic chill of winter. Frost clung to the edges of the stone steps. Her breath rose in pale ribbons as she pushed the heavy door open, its hinges crying out like an old man woken too early. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply, hugging her bones. It smelled of wet ash, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, like incense trapped for decades. Light filtered in slanted columns through fractured glass, scattering color across the dusty pews. Blues like bruises, golds like faded hope. Shadows pooled along the walls in shapes that didn't match the objects around them. Evelyn felt each detail with painful clarity because grief had sharpened her senses. She still carried the weight of losing her mother, a weight that pressed against her ribs like a locked box she refused to open. She hadn't wanted to come back. Not here. Not to the place where her childhood fractured. But the letter, creased, trembling in her coat pocket, promised that the truth buried inside this sanctuary held her redemption. Her mother wrote of abundance not as wealth, but as answers. Answers Evelyn had spent most of her life chasing in all the wrong places. And now, standing beneath the hanging cross, she felt something stir, as if divine timing had finally caught up to her, as if the manifestation of her mother's final wish waited just behind the altar, where the dust was suspiciously disturbed. Evelyn remained at the center aisle, her pulse echoing in the hollow chamber like a second heartbeat that didn't belong entirely to her. She took one careful step forward, and the sound of her boots scraping against the stone floor rippled through the sanctuary in a way that felt deliberate, as if the room itself were acknowledging her return. A thin mist of dust rose with each movement, swirling upward in delicate spirals, catching the scattered beams of light that filtered through the cracked stained glass windows. Blues and golds shimmered on the floating particles, transforming the air into something almost alive. She kept moving, not because she wanted to, but because stopping meant facing the truth she had avoided for nearly 3 decades. The truth her mother had hinted at with trembling handwriting in that final letter. A truth buried behind the altar. Literally or metaphorically, Evelyn wasn't sure, but the instructions had been clear. You'll understand when you're ready. Ready. What a strange word for someone who felt like a half-stitched wound. The sanctuary felt colder the closer she came to the altar. Not just cold, but dense, as if the air thickened to slow her down. Her breath fogged in front of her. She wrapped her coat tighter, but it made no difference. The chill seemed to come from the stone itself, from the years of silence, absorbed into every crack of the building. Her fingers brushed the edge of a pew, and she flinched. The wood was icy, but beneath the cold was something else, an almost electrical vibration, faint yet unmistakably real. She snatched her hand back. "It's just nerves," she whispered. But her voice didn't sound like her own. The cross above her hung motionless now, as if its earlier movement were something imagined, a trick of grief and old memories. Yet she couldn't shake the certainty that it had turned toward her, drawn by something beneath her skin, an emotion she hadn't let herself feel since the night of the fire. Faith, maybe, or the lack of it, or something deeper, older, like a thread pulling taut through her chest. The scent of burnt cedar drifted through the air again, stronger than before, cutting through the chill. She remembered that smell from childhood, her mother lighting a candle before every Sunday service. The warmth of her hand squeezing Evelyn's shoulder, her whispered promise, "One day you'll understand that nothing happens outside divine timing." Evelyn's throat tightened. She had spent a lifetime running from those words. Now they followed her like a shadow. She reached the altar steps. Dust coated every inch except for one narrow strip on the right side, as if someone, or something, had recently disturbed the floor. Several inches of dust had been pushed aside in a curved motion, forming a crescent shape she didn't recognize, and behind the altar, barely visible in the dim light, the stone wall bore a subtle imprint, a square, like something had once been embedded there. Her heart hammered. This wasn't imagination. Something had been here. She knelt down, despite the cold biting through her jeans. When she placed her palm against the floor, the stone felt warm. Warm in a way stone shouldn't feel. Warm like breath, trapped beneath the earth. She jerked her hand back and inhaled sharply. Behind her, something creaked. She froze, not daring to breathe. The sanctuary remained still, silent, watching. She stood slowly, her fingers trembling as she ran them along the edge of the altar. The wood was scarred, the burn marks from the years-old fire still visible, darkened ridges, uneven patches, grooves where flames had eaten their way upward. Evelyn tilted her head, studying the patterns. They weren't random. They formed a shape, a faint upward diagonal, almost like a letter or a symbol. She blinked. The pattern shifted subtly under the changing angle of light. Not just a symbol, 2 symbols, overlapping. One she recognized from an old church hymn book her mother used to keep. The other, older, much older, not Christian, not anything she could name. Her stomach tightened. "Mother, what did you want me to see?" She tried to steady her breathing, but her heartbeat kept climbing into her throat. She pressed her palm to her chest, grounding herself. Redemption often required discomfort. That was something her mother used to say whenever life became too heavy. Discomfort is the beginning of clarity, but clarity wasn't what Evelyn felt now. What she felt was a pull, an awakening, a whisper at the edge of her consciousness telling her to look deeper. She stepped behind the altar. The dust there had indeed been disturbed. A rectangle of exposed stone, a faint indentation like the outline of a box. Not large, maybe the size of a small journal or wooden container. Something had been buried here, and recently. There were faint scratches on the stone, as though someone had pried it loose. Someone who didn't want to be discovered. Evelyn knelt again and pressed her ear to the cold stone. Nothing. Then, just as she was about to pull back, something vibrated, a soft hum, barely perceptible. Her breath hitched. No, that wasn't possible. Stone didn't hum, but it had. She placed both hands on the indentation and pushed. The stone shifted a fraction of an inch. Her pulse raced. She pushed again, harder, and the slab moved more this time, revealing a narrow opening beneath it, like a small cavity carved into the ground. A smell escaped, old earth, damp paper, and something metallic. Something familiar, something she had smelled once before, the night the sanctuary burned. Her eyes widened. Inside the cavity lay a folded piece of cloth, white linen, stained at the edges, and beneath it, something wooden. She reached in slowly, fingers brushing the object inside. Before she could lift it out, the sanctuary door slammed shut behind her with a deafening echo. Evelyn whipped around. No wind, no footsteps, no one else inside. Yet the cross above her moved again. Not an inch. Not a tilt. It turned, slowly, deliberately, until it faced her fully. Her breath deserted her. Something inside the cavity pulsed, once like a heartbeat waiting for her touch. And Evelyn realized, with chilling clarity, that whatever her mother wanted her to find, she had just awakened it, and it was no longer sleeping. The echo of the slamming door rolled through the sanctuary like a wave, bouncing off stone and wood, before dissolving into a silence that felt even heavier than before. Evelyn's first instinct was primitive and sharp. Run, get out, force the door open, step back into the ordinary world where crosses didn't move and stone didn't hum like a buried heart. But another instinct rose right behind it, quieter, older, shaped by years of unanswered questions. Stay. If you leave now, you'll never know why she sent you here. Her mother's handwriting flickered in her mind, the last line of the final letter etched into her memory, as if burned there. Every wound you think ruined you started in this place. But so did your redemption. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry. Redemption had always sounded like a church word, something you heard in sermons and never really touched. Now it felt like something physical under her fingertips, folded in cloth in a dark cavity beneath the altar. She forced herself to stand, her knees protesting from kneeling on stone. The cross above her now stared down with undeniable alignment, its vertical beam no longer slightly off-center, but perfectly lined with her body. As if she had become the axis of the room. The air pressed in on her, charged with a tension that was not quite fear and not quite peace. It was something in between, a strange field where faith and suspicion collided. "Okay," she whispered, her voice breaking the stillness. "You wanted me here, didn't you?" She wasn't sure if she was talking to God, to the memory of her mother, or to the sanctuary itself. Maybe all three, maybe none. She took a slow breath, letting the cold air scrape down her lungs, then turned back to the cavity. The cloth inside, white once, now stained cream and brown, looked like it had waited a long time to be touched. The edges were frayed, the fibers hardened with age. Evelyn reached in again, her hand shaking as she brushed against it. This time, the stone did not hum. Instead, she felt something else, a faint warmth radiating from beneath the cloth, a tiny pocket of heat in a chamber of cold. She drew the bundle out carefully, brushing loose soil from its surface. The weight surprised her, heavier than it looked, as if something inside carried more than its size suggested. She placed it gently on the altar, its fabric leaving a faint trail of dust. For a moment she simply stared at it, her thoughts splintering into 1,000 directions. What if this wasn't meant for her? What if someone else had hidden it here and her mother had only known about its existence, not its purpose? What if opening it would change more than just what she believed? Her hands hovered above the cloth, fingers flexing and curling, pulling back at the last second. Fear wasn't unfamiliar to her. She had lived most of her adult life with an undercurrent of dread about money, health, relationships, the fragile sense of prosperity she tried to build and never quite trusted. But this fear felt different. This one was threaded with anticipation, with the sense that something long delayed had finally caught up to her. A moment of divine timing she had unknowingly walked toward for 27 years. "You came all this way," she murmured to herself. "You don't get to stop here." She pinched the edge of the cloth and began to unfold it. The first layer came away easily, releasing a stronger wave of scent. Iron, old wood, and dried wax. The odor of old rituals. The second layer stuck for a moment, resisting, then peeled back with a soft crackle, exposing what lay inside. It wasn't a box. It was a wooden plaque, dark, worn, the grains smoothed by hands that had touched it long before she was born. Carved into the surface were words, not in English, not at first glance. She recognized a few Greek letters from college, others that resembled Latin, and something more archaic woven between them. The inscription curved along the top edge like a crown, but at the center, below the swirl of old characters, there was a second line, hand-etched, uneven, newer, English. Her heart stuttered when she recognized the handwriting. It was her mother's. She traced the shallow groove of each letter with her eyes before daring to read them aloud. "What was burned was never meant to be destroyed, only uncovered." Her voice trembled. She swallowed and read the smaller line beneath it. "If you are reading this, it means the fire failed and you survived." The sanctuary felt suddenly smaller, tighter, as if the walls had leaned in an inch. She clutched the edge of the altar to steady herself. "Failed," she whispered. "What do you mean, failed?" The fire had been a tragedy. That was the narrative she'd been given. The official story. Faulty wiring, flammable varnish, structural compromise. She had swallowed it because it was clean, simple, containable. But this sentence hinted at something else. The fire wasn't just an accident. It had been an attempt. Her chest constricted. Memories she had buried under years of busyness and distraction began to rise. The night of the fire. The smell of smoke slipping under the church doors. The sound of someone arguing near the altar. Her mother's hand pulling her back, whispering, "Don't look, Evelyn, keep walking, keep walking." She had been 12, old enough to notice, young enough to be silenced. She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in her eyes. Tears blurred the plaque, smearing the letters into dark lines. She set it down and pressed the heels of her hands against her face. This sanctuary wasn't just the site of an old tragedy. It was the epicenter of something her mother had spent decades trying to shield her from, something tied to her own sense of unworthiness, the feeling that abundance belonged to other people, that good things slipped away from her hands as soon as she reached for them. She lowered her hands slowly, drawing in a long breath. If her mother had etched those words into wood and buried them behind the altar, it was because she believed Evelyn would one day come back and read them. That in itself held a kind of manifestation, a faith that future Evelyn would be brave enough to face what 12-year-old Evelyn could not. Her gaze dropped back to the plaque. Around the inscription, smaller symbols curved outward like rays. They resembled flames, but not chaotic ones, ordered, controlled, fire as revelation, not destruction. Evelyn tilted it toward the light, spilling through the cracked glass. The gold from the stained windows slid over the carved letters, making them appear to glow. For a fleeting second, the sanctuary didn't feel haunted. It felt waiting, like a place suspended between judgment and forgiveness. What was burned was never meant to be destroyed, she repeated, this time slowing down, letting each word sink into the hollow spaces inside her. Only uncovered. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the plaque. Uncovered meant something was still hidden. Something the fire had not erased. She glanced back at the cavity in the floor. Had there been more than one object? Had something already been removed by someone else? The disturbed dust suggested it. The shallow scratches around the opening confirmed it. She wasn't the first to find this place. A cold ripple moved along her spine. Someone else read this before me. The thought landed with the weight of a stone dropped into deep water. Who? When? Were they still alive? Did they understand what they had found, or were they searching for more just like she was now? The cross creaked softly above her, wood shifting against metal hooks. She flinched, then exhaled shakily. "If you're trying to tell me something," she said, glancing up, "you're going to have to be clearer than that." A faint sound answered. Not from the cross, from the far left side of the sanctuary, beyond the last pew. It was hardly more than a whisper, the slide of something against stone, a soft thud. Then stillness again. Her skin prickled. Logic insisted it was an animal, a rat maybe, or a bird that had found its way in through a broken window. But another part of her, the part that had followed a letter across states and seasons, recognized that this day had been layered with too many coincidences to write this off as random. She slid the plaque back into the cloth but didn't wrap it fully. She wanted it near, accessible, a link between what she remembered and what she hadn't yet dared to recall. "Fine," she murmured, her voice a little steadier. "If this is about uncovering, then let's keep uncovering." She stepped away from the altar, the temperature shifting with her movement. To her right, the stained glass washed the floor in pale blue. To her left, the fractured remnants of a once crimson window cast the stone in tired red. The rest of the sanctuary lay in quiet shadow. She walked toward the sound's origin, each step measured, her senses wide open. The smell of damp earth deepened near the back wall. Another shape emerged, an old confessional booth, half collapsed, its wooden panels leaning at a precarious angle. One of the doors was slightly ajar. The thud had come from there, she was almost sure. Evelyn stopped a few feet away. The plaque felt heavier in her arm. Behind her, the altar waited. Ahead of her, the confessional gaped like a dark, small doorway into a part of the story she hadn't reached yet. For a long moment, she stood between them, between what had already been uncovered and whatever waited inside that fractured booth. A life lived avoiding the center of things had led her here, to the exact middle of this collision, past, present, fire, faith, fear, divine timing, all converging in a room that had once held Sunday songs and now held only her breathing. She took one last breath, the cold slicing through her lungs, and reached for the confessional door. It moved under her fingers with almost no resistance, as if someone on the other side had just let go. The confessional door swung inward with a breath of dust, releasing the smell of old timber, cold ash, and the faint sweetness of incense long absorbed into the grain. Evelyn held her breath as the darkness inside opened like a forgotten throat. For a moment, the booth looked exactly as she remembered from childhood. Small, cramped, carved with swirling patterns her fingers used to trace while her mother whispered prayers beside her. But this memory didn't comfort her. It merely sharpened the ache in her ribcage. A thin beam of fractured light slipped through the broken panel overhead, painting a pale stripe across the interior seat. She stepped closer, feeling the temperature shift again. Warmer this time, a gentle rise as if someone had just sat inside moments ago. Her pulse fluttered. She reached a trembling hand toward the doorway, letting her fingertips brush the edge of the wood. It felt faintly warm, not warm from sunlight. This part of the sanctuary had no light. Warm from touch. "Hello?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She wasn't expecting an answer, but a small, irrational part of her braced for one. Silence. So dense she could almost feel it pressing against her skin. She stepped inside. The cramped space squeezed around her immediately. The wooden walls were close enough that her breath bounced back warm against her cheeks. She sat carefully on the narrow bench, feeling it dip slightly under her weight, too slightly, as if someone had sat there recently, leaving behind a subtle memory of their presence. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness. The booth was empty, but not untouched. Scratches marred the inner wall, fresh ones, jagged, uneven, carved by a tool or fingernail not long ago. She leaned forward, tracing the marks with her fingertips. The scratches formed a shape, a pattern, not a word, but a symbol. A curved line intersecting a vertical slash. She had seen it before, on the plaque. The realization sent a cold ripple through her shoulders. Whoever made the scratches had known what was buried behind the altar. And they had been desperate, judging by the frantic scoring on the wood. She pulled the plaque partially from the cloth bundle, holding it up toward the slanted beam of light. The carved symbol shimmered faintly. The scratched one in the confessional matched it almost perfectly, though rougher, uneven, frantic. Someone had been trying to tell her something, or trying to warn her. Her mother's voice flickered through memory, soft, melodic, the voice she used only when speaking about things that terrified her, but that she refused to show fear about. "If you feel afraid, Evelyn, pause, but don't stop. Faith moves in silence before it moves in miracles." Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself with a long inhale. The scent of cedar, old confessionals and dust mingled with the coldness of the sanctuary outside. A heaviness settled across her shoulders, not suffocating but expectant, as though something in the booth had been waiting for this moment, for her. She opened her eyes again and leaned farther forward, studying the scratched symbol. Something glinted in the corner, a tiny reflection beneath the seat. She bent down, shifting to see better, a shard of metal, thin, sharp. She reached for it carefully. A small blade, maybe part of a pocket knife. Its handle was missing, but the metal still held faint warmth. Not animal, not wind. Someone had been here. Her throat tightened. She slid the shard into her coat pocket and stepped back out into the sanctuary. The shift from darkness to fractured light made the room feel even larger, like she had stepped into a world that existed just beyond this one. The cross above her loomed silently in its unnatural alignment. "I need to understand," she whispered, gripping the plaque against her chest. "I need to know why you brought me here, Mother." The sanctuary answered with a faint tremor, barely perceptible, more like a sigh than a sound. The dust in the air shifted, drifting toward the front pews, swirling in a loose current she couldn't explain. She followed the movement instinctively, pulled by the unusual motion. When she reached the first few rows, she stopped. The pew third from the front had something on its seat. A thin layer of dust covered the wood, except for one rectangular outline, clean, crisp, as if an object had rested there recently. She brushed her hand across the surface, and the cold wood shivered under her touch. "What was here?" she murmured. Then she saw it, wedged between the seat and the support beam. A slip of paper, old, yellowed. She slid it out carefully, unfolding it with slow hands. Her stomach dropped. It was a page torn from her mother's handwriting notebook, the same notebook Evelyn had seen countless times on the dining room table growing up. Her mother practiced calligraphy and scripture verses in it. But this wasn't scripture. 3 lines, Written in rushed, uneven strokes, the fire was not meant to destroy. It was meant to seal what they found. If the seal breaks, you must finish what I could not. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. She gripped the pew to steady herself. Finish what I could not. Her mother, always gentle, always cautious, writing something that sounded like a warning, meant for a different life, a darker one. She folded the paper and slipped it beside the plaque in her arm. "What did you try to seal?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. A sudden gust of cold air swept through the sanctuary, though the doors and windows were all shut. The candles in their metal holders along the back wall flickered, one of them lighting for a split second, its wick glowing orange before dying again. Evelyn took a step back. A story gap opened inside her chest, wide, gaping, impossible to ignore. Something here was unfinished, something here was awake, and she was not standing in an empty building. She was standing in a place that remembered. She turned her gaze toward the side aisle. The dust on the floor bore faint footprints, not hers. Smaller feet, bare, leading toward the sacristy door. Her breath hitched. Bare feet, in a building sealed for nearly 3 decades. She followed slowly, each footstep matching the rhythm of her pulse. The footprints turned abruptly toward a storage closet near the sacristy, one she remembered from childhood, where extra hymnals and candles were kept. The door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness leaking into the colder air outside. "Please," she whispered without meaning to, though she didn't know whom the plea was for. Her mother, God, herself. She reached out and nudged the door open. Inside, the temperature rose sharply, warm like a living thing breathed there moments ago. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding brittle books and melted candle remnants. In the corner, beneath a broken lantern, something shifted. She froze. Her eyes adjusted. And then she saw it. Not a person, not an animal, but a wooden box. The same size and shape as the indentation behind the altar. It sat on the floor as if someone had placed it there gently. Or recently. Evelyn's pulse spiked. She stepped forward, kneeling beside it. The lid bore the same carved symbol, the curved line intersecting the vertical slash, the one scratched inside the confessional, the one carved into the plaque, the one her mother tried to seal. Her fingers trembled as she touched the lid. It was warm, warm like breath, warm like a heartbeat, warm like something alive inside. A whisper brushed her ear, soft, airy, not quite a word, not quite a breath. She sucked in a sharp gasp, spinning around. No one there, only the shifting dust and the lingering scent of cedar. She turned back to the box. Something inside moved, just once, a soft thud. Evelyn's breath faltered. Divine timing doesn't wait forever. She placed both hands on the lid and lifted. The lid rose with a low, reluctant groan, as though the box resisted being opened after so many years locked away from light. Evelyn lifted it slowly, expecting old papers, a relic, maybe a wooden carving, something inert, something that simply held meaning because the past had touched it. But when she finally saw what was inside, her breath caught, a thin gasp slicing the cold air. It wasn't an object. It was several. A small bundle wrapped in the same linen as the plaque. A folded letter sealed with red wax. A fragment of stained glass, deep blue, broken irregularly. A strip of burned wood carved with symbols she didn't recognize. And beneath all of it, something that shouldn't have survived the fire. A journal. Her mother's journal. The leather cover was cracked, darkened by heat, edges curled as if rescued from flame at the last possible second. Evelyn's fingertips hovered over it, trembling violently. She hadn't seen this journal since the night of the fire. She remembered her mother grabbing it from the sacristy table moments before dragging Evelyn out of the sanctuary, shouting at her to keep her eyes forward. She remembered the smoke, the screaming wood, the crackling sound of beams falling behind them. But she didn't remember seeing the journal again. She never asked. Her mother never offered. The silence became part of the story. Now it rested here, impossibly intact in a room no one had entered for 27 years. Her throat tightened as she touched the leather. Heat met her skin, gentle, pulsing, like a heart beneath her hand. "No," she whispered, snatching her fingers away. The cold air collapsed around her again. She tried to steady herself, forcing a slow inhale. "It's impossible." But the truth pressed insistently against her mind. Nothing about this day obeyed the logic she clung to, not the cross-turning, not the humming stone, not the footprints in the dust, not the box appearing where it shouldn't have been. Divine timing. Her mother used those words like a compass, as if everything, even the painful things, followed a precise design. Evelyn reached in, lifting the journal carefully. The leather groaned, brittle but whole. She held it against her chest for a moment, the shape comforting in a way that made her eyes sting. Then she set it on the floor and reached for the letter. The wax seal bore the same carved symbol, the intersecting line and curve. She pressed her thumb against it. The seal snapped reluctantly, like a breath ending. She unfolded the parchment with deliberate, unsteady hands. Her mother's handwriting covered the page, looser and more hurried than usual. "If you found this, the sanctuary has awakened again. I could not stop what they discovered. I could only delay it. Forgive me for leaving you with the final task, but the one who ignited the fire is not gone." Evelyn's pulse hammered painfully. Her mother always spoke gently, never dramatically. For her to write words like "awakened" and "final task" meant she had been terrified, and trying to protect Evelyn from something larger, something she now stood in the middle of. She swallowed hard and read on. They believed the symbols revealed a doorway. They were wrong. The doorway is not physical. It opens in the person who deciphers the meaning. If the plaque is in your hands, the fire did not erase it, which means the one who sought it still seeks. A whisper of nausea rolled through her stomach. Someone else was looking for this. Someone who had already been inside the sanctuary. A flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her jerk her head up. The storage closet remained still, but the dust on the floor had shifted, only slightly, as if stirred by a soft breath. She scanned the shadows quickly. Nothing moved now. Her mother's letter continued. "You survived because the symbols did not choose you then. But now, you came willingly. If you open the journal, it will begin." Evelyn lowered the letter, her hands shaking. Begin what? Redemption? Manifestation of old truths? Or something none of them understood? She looked at the journal on the ground. Its leather cover seemed to darken as the shadows moved around it, as though absorbing the dim light of the sanctuary. A quiet dread spread through her chest, slow and heavy, but beneath it, something else, a flicker of purpose, a feeling that the missing pieces of her life, her fears, failures, the way prosperity always slipped like sand through her fingers, were tied to something that happened in this sanctuary, something her mother had tried to hide. She lifted the journal again, turning it over. On the back cover, barely visible beneath scorch marks, another symbol had been carved. This one different. A circle. A single opening on one side, like a door half open. Her breath caught. A doorway that opens in the person who deciphers it. "What were you trying to keep from me?" she whispered. The sanctuary answered with a faint creak. The cross shifting again, wood tightening against metal, not moving this time, not turning, just reacting. She opened the journal. The first page was blank, charred at the edges, browned by smoke, but blank. She turned the page. Blank again. Third page. Fourth. She felt the panic rising. No, you wrote in this. I saw you." She flipped faster now, pages whispering under her fingers. Blank, 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 every page empty, as though the fire had consumed the ink before touching the paper, as though the words had been swallowed whole. Her breathing grew shallow. Then a sound, soft, delicate, rose from the journal. Ink, dripping. She froze, the book open in her hands. A bead of dark fluid gathered near the top of one page, swelling slowly, then trailing downward in a thin, wavering line. Another droplet formed beside it. Then another, 3 thin lines of ink sliding down the blank page, forming something, a symbol, the same symbol, the intersecting line and curve. Her hand trembled violently. She stumbled backward, hitting the shelves behind her. Papers fluttered to the floor. The journal lay open, ink continuing to bleed into the page as if writing itself. "No," she whispered. "This isn't real. This isn't—" A whisper brushed the back of her neck. Close, warm, human. She spun around, heart slamming against her ribs. Nothing, only shadows, only silence. But she wasn't alone anymore. She felt it, in the air, in her skin. Something had shifted the moment she opened the journal. Something layered between worlds now watched her. She reached down, grabbed the journal with trembling fingers, and pressed it shut. The ink inside pulsed once. She felt it through the leather. This wasn't about a doorway in the sanctuary. This was about a doorway in her. The journal vibrated faintly in her grip. The plaque warmed. The letter seemed almost to breathe, each object reacting to her presence as though recognizing her, as though choosing her. "No," she said again, though the word lost strength. "I'm not ready for this." But readiness no longer mattered. She opened the letter again, reading the final line. "If you are holding these things, you are the last one who can stop him." Him. The fire starter, the one who sought, the one still seeking, her mother's enemy, her mother's fear, and now, her inheritance. A low hum rose from the journal, not stone this time, not wood, from within the pages. The ink inside moved. Evelyn stumbled backward, the journal clutched to her chest. She hit the wall behind her, cold stone pressing into her spine. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. Then, from somewhere deeper in the sanctuary, a footstep, slow, deliberate, behind the altar. Evelyn froze. Another step, closer. Her pulse hammered wildly. She wasn't alone in the sanctuary. Someone else had been waiting for her to open the journal. And now, he was coming. The sound of the footsteps settled into the cold stone floor with a slow, deliberate weight. Too heavy to be imagination, too intentional to be a random shift of the building. Evelyn's heartbeat surged into her throat, a frantic drum against the suffocating silence. She pressed her back to the wall, the journal clutched tightly to her chest, fingers digging into the scorched leather. Another step, this one closer, measured. As if whoever was behind the altar wasn't approaching her blindly, but had been standing there, waiting for her to finish reading, waiting for the doorway inside her to open. She forced a breath into her lungs, though the air tasted sharp, like metal scraped against stone. The sanctuary dimmed just slightly, as if the stained glass colors faded under a shadow she couldn't yet see. Her breath left her in a thin tremor. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice echoing too loudly. "Show yourself." Silence answered at first. Then a soft exhale, human, close. Evelyn's knees weakened, but she pushed herself forward, peeling away from the wall step by step. She couldn't hide, not now, not after everything she'd uncovered, not when every sign pointed to the truth her mother had tried to bury beneath symbols, fire, and silence. When she reached the aisle, she froze. He stepped into view. A shadow first, long, angular, then a figure emerging from behind the altar with slow precision. His clothing was dark, indistinguishable from the deeper shadows, his posture stiff, his head slightly bowed. For a moment he looked like a priest in silhouette, an old figure stepping out of a confession booth. But then he raised his head, and Evelyn's breath caught. He wasn't old, he wasn't frail, and he wasn't someone she recognized, at least not from her adult life. His face was lean, sharply contoured, eyes dark, but not empty. They held something unsettling, familiarity, recognition. As if he had waited years for her to return, as if he had always expected her. "You shouldn't be here," Evelyn said, though her voice wavered, betraying her fear. He blinked, slow, almost serene. "You came back," he murmured, "just like she said you would." She stiffened. His voice, low, calm, held a strange softness wrapped in something harder. "Who?" she managed. He took a step forward. Dust stirred around his boots, the particles drifting sideways instead of upward, as if pushed by heat instead of air. "Your mother." Evelyn's pulse ruptured into panic. "You knew my mother?" He didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted, as though her question amused him. "I knew what she tried to stop. I knew what she buried." His gaze lowered to the journal pressed against her chest. "And I knew the fire would not destroy it." The room seemed to tilt. "You—" Her voice cracked. "You were here that night." A slow nod. Evelyn stumbled backward. "You set the fire." He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He simply watched her with the quiet patience of someone who believed the outcome was already written. "I didn't light it to kill," he said finally. "I lit it to contain." His eyes flickered toward the plaque inside the cloth. "To seal what had started. Your mother understood that. Eventually." "Liar." Her voice trembled violently. "She tried to save this place. She tried to protect you," he finished, stepping closer. "She wasn't protecting the sanctuary. She was protecting what the symbols awakened in you the night you first saw them." Evelyn's breath left her in a thin, shocked gasp. "What awakened in me?" He stopped just a few feet away. The light behind him fractured through blue and gold-stained glass, casting uneven shadows across his face. "You don't remember," he said quietly. "But you will." The sanctuary felt too small now. The shadows too sentient. The altar too close. "I'm leaving," she whispered. "Move." He didn't move. He lifted his hand slightly, palm open, not threatening, almost peaceful. "You can leave," he said, "but the journal will not let you." She tightened her grip instinctively. "It's a book," she hissed. "It's a key," he corrected, "one that opens only in the person chosen to carry it." Then he added with unsettling calm, "Faith isn't passive, Evelyn. It calls. It shapes, it transforms. Even when you run from it," her skin prickled. "How do you know my name?" Another step, close now, too close, "because your mother wasn't the only one who raised you inside these walls." A violent shiver ran down her spine. "No," she whispered, "I don't know you. I would remember." "You were 12, he said softly, "and memory protects itself when it needs to. But the symbols, what they awakened in you, were never erased, just hidden." The journal pulsed once against her ribs. She staggered. His gaze sharpened. "You feel it," he said, "don't you?" She didn't answer. The tremor inside her chest answered for her, persistent, ancient, pulsing like a trapped heartbeat. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Redemption," he murmured, "for all of us." He tilted his head slightly. "But you don't understand yet. You think redemption is personal. It isn't. It's collective. It's generational. And it belongs to the one who holds the journal." "It belongs to me," Evelyn said, surprising herself. His lips curved slightly, not a smile but the shadow of something like acknowledgement. "It does," he agreed, "and that's why you're the one who has to see it through." "See what through?" she asked. He stepped aside, finally clearing her path, but not freeing her from his presence. What your mother started, he said, what the fire failed to erase, what the symbols tried to seal, what the doorway inside you is ready to open. Her throat tightened painfully. I don't want this, she whispered. The doorway doesn't require permission, he replied. It requires willingness. I am not willing. You came back. He paused. That is willingness. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dust drifted between them like floating ash. The sanctuary hummed with the low vibration Evelyn had felt in her bones since the moment she entered. Then, almost gently, he said, "Open the journal." She shook her head violently. "No." "Open it," he repeated, a soft command. "And you'll understand why I had to burn this place." She backed away. "You're insane." "Am I?" He tilted his head. "Or are you finally standing in the place where faith becomes sight?" His voice lowered. "Where divine timing reveals what prosperity of the soul truly means." His eyes glinted with a quiet intensity. "Where the manifestation your mother feared the most begins." Evelyn's breath caught. The journal vibrated faintly again, stronger this time. Something inside wanted out. Something inside wanted her. She shook her head. "I won't open it." He stepped closer again, but not to touch her, only to whisper, "You already did." Her chest tightened. She looked down. The journal, the one pressed shut against her heart, was no longer closed. Its pages were opening on their own, turning slowly, deliberately, as if the book were breathing, as if the doorway inside her had already begun to widen. And the last thing Evelyn heard before the entire sanctuary shifted was the man's quiet, devastating whisper, "Now it begins." The sanctuary did not shake the way buildings do in earthquakes. There was no violent jolt, no crashing stone, no shower of debris. Instead, the shift was internal, like a held breath finally exhaled after decades. The air thickened, then thinned. Colors deepened, and every sound, her heartbeat, the faint creak of the cross, the whisper of pages turning, became painfully clear. Evelyn felt it first in her sternum, a pressure pushing outward, as if something inside her had been pulled into alignment with something ancient in the room. The journal rested open in her hands, though she hadn't loosened her grip. Its pages fluttered once, then went still. Ink formed along the fibers, not in wild drips this time, but in deliberate, forming lines. Words, sentences, written in handwriting she recognized and yet didn't, her own. She stared, breath shallow, as letters curled across the page, as though an invisible version of her hand moved there. Each line precise, each curve familiar. The first sentence formed fully, and Evelyn read it under her breath. "I was 12 when the sanctuary chose me." Her chest constricted. Memory, heavy and slow, rose from the depths like something long anchored. Behind her, the man watched in silence. No triumphant smile, no gloating, just a solemn attention, as if he was witnessing something inevitable, something long overdue. "What is this?" she whispered, not looking up. "What's happening to me?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "The doorway isn't in the stone, Evelyn. It's in your memory, in your ability to see what others refuse to see. Your mother knew that. She spent years trying to keep the door closed. But the moment you came back, it began to open." The ink on the page bled into another sentence. "I remember the night of the fire, and I remember the moment my faith felt like both a burden and a gift." A flicker of heat moved through her chest, painful but not destructive, like circulation returning to a limb that had been numb too long. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I don't remember," she insisted, though the edge in her voice was already fraying. "I've tried. For years. It's always fog." "Fog is a kind of mercy," he replied. "But mercy has its limits when truth is the only path to redemption." The word pierced her. Redemption, her mother's promise, the plaque's whisper, the letter's plea. The journal continued to write. The fire was not the beginning of the story. It was the interruption. Images swelled behind her eyes, her mother's hand gripping hers. The sound of raised voices near the altar, the glow of candle flames burning higher than they should. She closed her eyes, and the sanctuary around her folded into the sanctuary from 27 years ago. She saw herself, small, thin, 12 years old, standing at the front pew, staring up at the symbol carved into the wooden plaque for the first time. The intersecting line and curve, the circle with the opening, the symbols hadn't frightened her then, they had fascinated her, the way they seemed to move when she stared at them long enough. The way her chest felt warm and full, like abundance that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with purpose. She heard her mother arguing in the sacristy with a man whose voice was hushed but urgent, the same timbre as the one standing in front of her now. She heard her mother say, "She's only a child," and the man answer, "Exactly. She hasn't been corrupted yet. She can see what we can't." Evelyn's eyes flew open. "You wanted me for this even then," she whispered, horror and understanding tangled in her throat. His expression tightened. "I wanted someone the symbols chose. I didn't want what the others wanted, power, control, prosperity twisted into something ugly. I wanted someone who could carry a different manifestation, a cleaner one. Your mother didn't trust any of us with that, so she ran. She took you. She took the journal. And she left me with a building full of men who thought they could force heaven to answer. The fire." Her voice shook. "You set it to stop them." He nodded once, slowly. "I lit it to break the circle, to dissolve the gathering before they could complete what they started. Your mother helped me. She got you out, but—" His gaze dropped, shadow crossing his face. "Fire isn't subtle. Innocent things burn too. Holiness and arrogance share the same air. Sometimes they both ignite." The journal's ink thickened into a darker line. "I survived the fire because the symbols refused to attach to my fear. They waited for my choice instead." Evelyn exhaled slowly, chest aching. The choice. She had always felt like life happened to her, like she was a responder, never an initiator. Now she saw the cruel irony. The one thing that had shaped her life most had been waiting for her to decide. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Spare me the poetry. Say it plainly." "For you to do what your mother couldn't," he said quietly. "Finish the ceiling, but not with fire, with understanding." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He gestured toward the journal. "Read." More words had appeared, the ink forming curves and angles with patient resolve. "A doorway is not evil, it only reveals what crosses through it." Another line. "What they wanted to bring through was power. What my mother wanted to protect was people. What I must choose now is whether this symbol will be a wound or a witness." Her throat tightened. The sanctuary around her seemed to hold its breath, the dust pausing mid-air, the cold and warmth merging into something almost neutral. "Waiting." He spoke softer now. "The reason your life felt like it never quite fit is because you were living with everything half open. Half faith, half fear, half truth, half memory. You felt prosperity brush against you and slip away because the story underneath your life was never finished, and unfinished stories bleed into every decision." A single tear slid down her cheek, not dramatic, quiet, heavy. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "No one asks to be a doorway," he replied, "but some lives are shaped that way anyway. The question isn't whether you asked for it, it's whether you refuse it or redeem it." Redemption. The journal's page filled faster now, as if the ink had been waiting for that word. Redemption is not undoing. It is rewriting, not erasing the fire, but deciding what the fire means. Her fingers tightened on the leather. How? He held her gaze. By using what they wanted for control, as a map to compassion instead. She looked down at the symbol, etched into the page now, glowing faintly under the fractured stain of blue and gold light. What exactly did they think it was? She asked. A code, he said, a formula, a way to manipulate outcomes, to bend divine timing to human will, to force abundance instead of receiving it, to manifest without accountability. He shook his head. But that's not what it is. It's a mirror. It doesn't grant power, it exposes it. Evelyn felt something loosen inside her, something that had clenched around every failure, every disappointment. So if I accept it, she said slowly, if I let this doorway open in me, what happens? He didn't look triumphant. He looked almost relieved. You finally see your life as it was, he answered. Not as a series of random losses, but as a pattern, as a map of where fear ruled and where faith tried to speak. The journal will fill with what you've refused to remember, your own words, your own truth, and that truth seals the symbol once and for all, not as a weapon, but as a testimony. She swallowed. And you? He held her eyes for a long, quiet moment. I was the one who lit the fire, he said, but I was also the one who stayed to keep others out after it was sealed. That's why I'm here now. This sanctuary is both my punishment and my purpose. I can't leave until the doorway closes cleanly, until you choose. A strange mixture of pity and anger rose in her chest. He had hurt her life by saving it. He had saved her life by hurting it. Two truths colliding. She looked at the journal again. The pages no longer wrote themselves. The ink waited. This isn't magic, she murmured. No, he agreed. It's ownership. Evelyn drew a deep, trembling breath. The sanctuary's cold seeped into her hands, but the journal warmed them from within. She felt something forming at the intersection of past and present. Not a doorway in stone, a doorway in meaning. I'm tired of living like my life is a mistake, she whispered. Her voice broke. I'm tired of treating prosperity like it's reserved for other people, of speaking about abundance like it's a language I don't deserve to learn. I'm tired of running from the part of me that still believes there's a pattern, even in the pain. The cross above her gave a subtle, nearly imperceptible creak, not turning, simply settling into place. She pressed her palm flat against the journal's open page. I choose to remember, she said. The ink moved instantly, rushing, spiraling, filling line after line. Evelyn felt it, not as an invasion, but as a release. Memories unfolded not with the sharpness of trauma, but with the clarity of understanding. She saw the men around the altar that night, their faces hungry and bright with misguided zeal. She saw her mother's fear, her desperate courage. She saw the man beside her striking the match, not with hatred, but with a terrible, broken faith that this was the only way to stop something worse. And she saw herself, 12 years old, standing between the plaque and the cross, feeling the warmth in her chest and telling God, in a whisper only heaven could hear, if this is real, don't let it be wasted on men who only want power. Let it be used to heal instead. The doorway hadn't started today. It had started then. This was not the beginning. This was the remembering. Tears streamed down her face now, soft and steady. The journal drank her truth greedily. Page after page filled until, at last, the ink slowed, then stopped. The final line wrote itself in letters steady and strong. What was buried behind the altar wasn't a secret. It was a story waiting for someone brave enough to tell it differently. The sanctuary sighed. The pressure in the air eased. The symbol on the page faded, just slightly, like embers cooling after burning clean. The man exhaled, shoulders slumping as if a weight had finally slipped from his spine. "It's done," he murmured. "The seal holds. Not with fire this time, but with truth." Evelyn closed the journal gently. The leather no longer pulsed. It was just warm, human warm. "So what now?" she asked, voice raw. "Now," he said, stepping back, his form blending into the fractured light, "you leave this place. And you don't let the story end with a burning sanctuary. You let it continue in people, in the way you live, in the way you talk about faith without fear, in the way you show that redemption is not a miracle event, but a series of honest choices." He paused, then added quietly, "And I can finally stop guarding ashes." She blinked. The air around him seemed to thin, as if the shadow he'd carried finally belonged to the past instead of the present. He walked toward the side aisle, toward the old sacristy door. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder. "Every time you're tempted to think your life is random, remember today. Remember that even what tried to destroy you was folded into divine timing you couldn't see. That memory is where you'll find me, not as a ghost, as a warning, and as a reminder." He opened the door. Light, not from outside, but from somewhere softer, leaked through the crack. "Prosperity of the soul," he said, "is when your story stops being something you run from and becomes something you offer." Then he stepped through. The door closed without a sound. Silence returned. But it was different now. Not heavy, not haunted. Hollow in a way that invited new sound. Evelyn stood alone in the sanctuary, alone and not. The cross above her, no longer twisted, faced forward again, aligned with the central aisle, with her. As if it had turned not to accuse her, but to meet her halfway. To say, "I've been facing you all along. You're the one who kept walking away." She walked slowly back to the altar and looked at the spot where the stone slab had been lifted. The cavity was empty now, clean. Nothing hummed beneath the surface. The plaque in the linen felt lighter in her arm, as if its work were done. She set it gently on the altar and rested the journal beside it. For a moment, she simply breathed. Cold air in, warm air out. Then, in the softest voice she'd used in years, she prayed. Not for money, not for success, not even for abundance, though she felt its quiet echo in her chest. She prayed for courage, to live with the door inside her open, not to darkness, but to meaning. When she finally turned to leave, the sanctuary felt smaller, or maybe she had grown. She walked down the central aisle, her footsteps no longer swallowed by fear. At the doorway she paused and looked back one last time. The dust hovered in the fractured light like 1,000 tiny possibilities. "What was burned," she whispered, remembering the words carved in wood, "was never meant to be destroyed." She let the rest finish itself in her mind. Only uncovered. She stepped outside into the cold, bright air and closed the door behind her. Later, when she would try to explain this day and fail, she would always return to a single phrase, a quiet echo that refused to leave her. "The cross didn't turn to judge me. It turned to show me I'd been walking away from my own story. And if you're listening to this now, somewhere far from that old sanctuary, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like life was trying to turn something toward you, long before you were ready to face it?"